This is what happens to people who have the negative equity and just give up and stop paying their payments. They could lose about 50% of what they paid on that vehicle in just a year and a half. So they are already $35,000 underwater on that vehicle at the time of signing. And on Ford's side, it's even worse. So right now, about 20% of the auto loans out there are $1,000 or more a month. That's absolutely insane to think about. We have a disaster going on in the car market right now, and it's a negative equity crisis. And who is this hurting? Right now, it's hurting consumers. Consumers paid way too much over the last few years, got loans that they could not afford, and they're starting to go delinquent on these loans. Who else does it hurt? It hurts new car dealers, because these customers that are so far underwater on their vehicles, they can now not buy a new car because they can't come up with the difference to be able to pay off their negative equity. It also is going to hurt the banks that wrote these loans that were way too high for the vehicle values that they were trying to loan on. They are going to lose a ton of money because we know these customers, they're going default on their loans, and who's going to have to eat that? It's going to be the banks. So I am at a used car dealer auction right now, and what are we seeing right now in the market? We're seeing that used car values on the wholesale level are dropping, and they're dropping in a major way. And what does that do for values of vehicles? Well, for your trade-ins, it absolutely crushes the values, because what these new car dealers will use when you're taking in your car to get it traded, to get it appraised by these new car dealers, they're going to use wholesale values, because that's what they can sell the cars for. They take your trade-ins, they send them here, and whatever they bring here, that's what they're selling these cars for. So as wholesale prices get hammered, so do trade-in values. And what does that affect? That affects the negative equity situation for a lot of consumers that are trying to upgrade to new cars right now. Wholesale prices get hammered, trade-in values get hammered, and that means the value of your car goes down, but your loan amount is not going down at the same rate that used car prices are going down. So what does that cause? That causes this massive negative equity pinch that we're seeing hammer the market right now. All right, so let me show you a real-world example of what happened to a lot of these consumers that have bought these vehicles over the last couple years. You see this row right here. These are Chargers, these are Challengers, and we know that 2 years ago, they were very hard to find, and all these dealerships, they were selling them like crazy. And this one right here, MSRP of $56,000. But 2 years ago, if this would have been $56,000, that consumer that wanted this, they wouldn't be paying $56,000 for it, because you couldn't find any of them. So on top of that $56,000, they're going to be paying $10,000 market adjustment. You've got your add-ons, you've got your nitrogen, you got your dock fees, all of that. And we knew that at that point in time, loans were easy to come by. So customers were coming in, they were being able to buy those $56,000 Challengers and Chargers for, at the end of the day, probably $80,000 after your add-ons, after your market adjustments. And banks were writing loans with these consumers putting little to no money down. Now, what happens? We fast forward, and no longer are they hard to find. Look, they're everywhere. Every Jeep, Dodge, Ram dealership you go to, there's going to be tons of them stacked up at the lots. And now, instead of paying over MSRP, instead of paying these market adjustments, instead of paying these add-ons, you can actually buy them for invoice or lower. A lot of these Jeep, Dodge, Ram dealerships are trying to get rid of these things because they have too many of them. So you're going to be able to get way better deals than what you could have gotten 2 years ago. So what does that do to the value of these vehicles? Well, you can go ahead and know that that Charger, that Challenger, that consumer paid way too much for 2 years ago, that as soon as they sign on the dotted line, they're going to lose 20% of the value of that vehicle. But they're not losing 20% on that $80,000 that they paid. They're losing 20% off of that $56,000. So you're going to bring that price down to what, $45,000 is what that vehicle is worth at the time that that consumer signs that car. So they are already $35,000 underwater on that vehicle at the time of signing. And we know that the next year they're going to lose about another 10%. But here's the problem with that too. Because we have a lot of these Chargers, a lot of these Challengers stacking up, because we have banks that are tightening up, because demand has been sucked out of the system so much, values are actually dropping way faster than what they normally do. So that customer that paid that $80,000 for that Charger, that Challenger 2 years ago, they might still owe $60,000, $65,000 on that vehicle, and they could go replace that vehicle right now with a brand new one, 2 years newer vehicle on this lot right now for less than what they owe on their current vehicle. This is why we have a negative equity crisis, and this is why it's going to get worse from here, because there are a lot of consumers that are in that exact same situation with that Charger, with that Challenger that they bought 2 years ago, and now these dealerships are trying to give these things away to get them off of their lot. Values are going way down. And you know what? The amount that they owe is not going down at the same clip as the values of the vehicles are going down. This is a big problem. This is a big problem. And just to talk a little bit about negative equity, just think about the EV market and people that have bought EVs over the last 2 years, and all the price cuts coming from Tesla, coming from Ford on the Mach-E's and on the Ford Lightnings. Those consumers have absolutely gotten hammered to the point where a lot of Tesla consumers are very, very angry at Elon because he has just decimated the values of these used Teslas that people have bought. And people who have bought them a year and a half ago, they are severely underwater on their Teslas. And on Ford's side, it's even worse. I've seen charts pulled up of where the values of these Ford Lightnings have gone. And people who have bought Ford Lightnings in the last year and a half, they could lose about 50% of what they paid on that vehicle in just a year and a half. And traditionally, if you buy a new car, you should expect to lose about 20% of its value in the first year. But no, with some of these EVs, that's not the case. You could lose up to 50% of its value in just 1 year. So right now, about 20% of the auto loans out there are $1,000 or more a month. That's absolutely insane to think about. And most of these auto loans that people are paying $1,000 or more a month, they are very long terms. Up to 84 months are what people are paying $1,000 or more for. And it's for a very long time. And I can see that this is going to be a big disaster for the auto loan delinquency problem that we're dealing with right now, because these consumers, as they have these very long terms, something is going to happen along the course of these auto loans that they're going to have to pay. And when something comes up, a lot of people, a lot of Americans, they don't have money put back to cover emergencies. They don't have money put back to cover a rainy day. So guess what? When that rainy day comes, that auto loan is not going to get paid. It's going to go delinquent, and these cars are going to get repoed. And that's what we're seeing right now. All of these consumers that signed up for these $1,000 monthly payments that they thought that they could pay, now they're figuring it out. And the banks are figuring it out too. That's why you're seeing tightening, because these consumers, they can't continue to pay it. Everything costs too much. Back when they signed up for these loans, inflation was not where it is today. Now everything costs so much more money. So that rainy day fund that they might have had, inflation is eating its lunch. It's going away. There's no more rainy day. So when the next rainy day comes up, that's when these cars get taken. So when someone has lots and lots of negative equity, and instead of trying to pay that off, trade it in, flip it to a new car, if they just decide, you know what, I'm just going to give up and I'm going to stop paying on this car, well, this is what happens to people who have the negative equity and just give up and stop paying their payments. These cars end up here at used car dealer auctions from these banks, from these financial institutions, because they get repossessed. People stop paying their payments. The banks, they'll go pick up the car, they'll take it to the auction, and they'll dump it. And whatever negative equity is left on the vehicle, that customer is on the hook for it. Now, the banks are probably never going to see that money, because this consumer wasn't making their payments anyway, so they probably couldn't. So they probably don't have any money left over, really probably any assets, anything that the bank can go after. So what's going to end up happening? Well, the bank takes the loss for it. They're going to write it down, write it off, whatever they need to do. But realistically, these banks are probably never going to get paid for that negative equity of what the customer owes on the car compared to what it's going to bring at these auctions, because it's going to bring a lot less than what these and it's not even going to be close to what these consumers owe on the vehicles, what it's going to bring here at the auction. And what my worry is for a lot of these banks, because of so much negative equity in the system, is that they're going to take massive hits. And what's that going to mean for the car market? It's going to mean that they have to get even tighter than what they are now, meaning fewer people can get loans, because I mean, they have to shore up. They have to stop writing these loans that are going to continuously go delinquent. So fewer people can get loans, means fewer cars can be purchased. That means that these new car dealers are going to suffer more because they're not able to get people in these vehicles, which should mean overall for new car dealers that prices have to go down if they're not selling as many cars. But see, here's the problem with that scenario for a small used car dealer like me and a lot of these other used car dealers that are out here at this auction. That means that new car dealers, if they're not selling, if they can't get people in loans to move these vehicles, then they're not going to get trade-ins. If they can't get trade-ins, they can't send cars here to auction. And that's why we see a lot of these empty spaces here at these auctions that we haven't seen over the last few months. And if we continue to not get inventory here at the used car dealer auctions, then used car prices have to stay stubbornly high because there's just not enough supply in the system to fulfill the demand coming from these used car dealers that are wanting to bid on these cars. So it's a big conundrum that these new car dealers, if they're slow because banks are tight, then used car dealers can't get cars and used car prices have to stay high. And it's almost ridiculous to say, but I need new car dealers to sell cars for my cars to get lower so I can buy more cars. So I need them to do good, and that means I need the banks not to suck and actually be able to continue to write loans. But we're in a position right now that they wrote so many bad loans over the last 3 years. That's probably not a reality. So I'm expecting banks to have a big time problem. I'm expecting them to tighten up even further. I'm expecting a lot of repo, a lot of delinquency, a lot of negative equity crisis to hang around in the car market. So whose fault is it that we're in this mess? Well, it's a little bit of everybody. Dealers charge way too much, added market adjustments, added add-ons that consumers did not need to run up the prices on these vehicles. It was banks for allowing these loans to happen way over the values of what these vehicles should have been loaned on. And at the end of the day, it's the consumer. The consumer is the one that signed up for these bad loans, that signed up for these ridiculous add-ons, for all these market adjustments, for paying these crazy prices to these dealers. At the end of the day, ultimately, it's going to be the customer that pays the biggest price. People who have bought in in these vehicles, equity is not going down. That we are seeing. I'm not doing very good with this.